President Trump's second term has barely started, and he's already floating the possibility of a third one, even though the U.S. Constitution forbids it. Trump telling NBC News this weekend, quote, there are methods by which he could do it, and that he's, quote, not joking. Here's how South Carolina Democratic Congressman Jim Clyburn is responding to it.
Well, I don't think he's joking at all. This man does not plan to leave this White House. All of this is about suspending, if not eliminating, the Constitution of the United States. And that's the track we're on. And I think people better get serious about this. When he says he's not joking about throwing away the Constitution, which is what he'll have to do in order to have a third term, and we are not going to rise up in opposition to that, I think it's time for us all to wake up.
We're joined now by CNN senior legal analyst Elie Honig. And Elie, the 22nd Amendment is very clear. No person shall be elected to the office of the president more than twice. Where is this wiggle room that Trump is seeing?
Well, Bree, you're exactly right. Lawyers love wiggle room and escape hatches, and here they're looking at the word elected. So here's the argument. It's fringy, but the 22nd Amendment says nobody should be elected president more than twice. Well, the theory is, well, then maybe what Donald Trump or any two-term president can do is run as vice president with, let's say, J.D. Vance at the top of the ticket. If they win, J.D. Vance resigns, Donald Trump becomes president. The argument is that, well, that wouldn't be getting elected. That would be becoming president through the line of succession, ascending to the presidency. So now the biggest problem with this, of course, though, is earlier in the Constitution. The 12th Amendment tells us that any person who's ineligible to be president is also ineligible to be vice president. So you would think that ends the question. That seems pretty straightforward. There is a very fringy, extreme school of thought that the 12th Amendment doesn't quite close the door on this, but I think those advocates are trying to thread a needle that is not threadable.
A little too cute by half there. So Trump said in addition to the J.D. Vance option, there are others too. That's a quote. What are they?
Well, the most straightforward option, it's completely unrealistic, but we can always amend the Constitution. I mean, we have done that 27 times in our history. It's virtually impossible in today's political landscape. In order to amend the Constitution, there's two ways to do it. One, we can convene a series of statewide constitutional conventions. That's never happened. That's not going to happen. Two, maybe equally as unlikely, you would have to get a 2/3 vote in the House of Representatives, a 2/3 vote in the U.S. Senate, and then 3/4 of the states, 38 of the 50 states would have to ratify that. So in theory, you could do that, but there's a 0.00% chance of that happening in reality.
And I mean, just talk about why this is an important tradition that has been codified in the Constitution. This is something that makes America quite extraordinary.
Well, and that's exactly why I think these end runs, playing with the word elected or trying to argue the 12th Amendment doesn't apply somehow. That's why I think they're disingenuous and dangerous. Part of what we have to do when we look at the Constitution is look at the spirit, look at the intent. I mean, George Washington stepped down after 2 terms because he understood we don't want a king. The reason we ratified the 22nd Amendment in 1951 after FDR had served 4 consecutive terms is we didn't want that. So you're right. I think norms are really important here, and that's part of what's different. Look, Bill Clinton and Barack Obama both served 2 terms. Neither of them, and so did George W. Bush, none of them ever in any serious way spoke about, considered, gave any life to the possibility of a 3rd term, and Donald Trump's doing it differently.
So you have a Republican Congressman, Andy Ogles, who has proposed changes to the 22nd Amendment. He did that just days after Trump took office back in January to allow Trump to serve a 3rd term, drawing a distinction between consecutive terms and non-consecutive terms. What do you think about that?
That's what we would call a distinction without a difference. I mean, who cares? The point is, we don't want kings in this country. It doesn't matter if they take a few years off in between. But look, God bless. I mean, if he wants to propose a constitutional amendment, if he can get 2/3 of the House, 2/3 of the Senate, and 3/4 of the states, then that'll become the way we do business. But I think he's looking for some way to argue that this situation is somehow different than the rest of our history, and it doesn't fly to me.
All right. Elie Honig, thank you so much for taking us through the legal ins and outs of that.
All right.
President Trump not backing down from talk of serving a 3rd term as president. Moments ago in the Oval Office, he said this.
People are asking me to run, and there's a whole story about running for a third term. I don't know. I never looked into it. They do say there's a way you can do it, but I don't know about that. But I have not looked into it.
Said he hadn't looked into it. Important, not just what he said there, but that's on the heels of what he said yesterday on NBC. He said that there are, quote, methods to serve a third term, telling Kristen Welker he is, quote, not joking. Very clear there. Well, famed constitutional scholar Lawrence Tribe spoke to Outfront, gave us an exclusive statement tonight. He says in part, quote, the 22nd Amendment prevents anyone from being elected president more than twice, but not from serving a third term. If Trump ran as J.D. Vance's running mate, he could step into the presidency, although he might have to strong-arm J.D. into stepping aside. And the 12th Amendment wouldn't stand in the way of that sort of Medvedev-Putin bargain because it bars only a vice presidential candidate who's ineligible to serve as president, which wouldn't exclude Trump. Medvedev-Putin, of course, is that Putin was president, then became prime minister while Medvedev was president, really a puppet, and then flipped back to be president again. Out front now, Norm Eisen, former special counsel to the House Judiciary Committee in Trump's first impeachment trial, and Brian Kalt, a law professor at Michigan State University, who has written about presidents speaking a third term. So, Brian, let me start with you. I know you're not advocating for this, right? I mean, but we're having a discussion about it. You do say there is a way for Trump to get around the constitutional amendments and serve a third term?
Well, like Professor Tribe said, the wording of the 22nd Amendment leaves room for that interpretation. There's plenty of people who don't interpret it that way, but ultimately it's not about what I think or one of those people thinks. It's what someone might be able to get away with, what the voters might allow, and what the courts might allow.
So you think this ambiguity is such that there is an ambiguity between, coming in as a vice presidential candidate as opposed to the top of the ticket, that could be the end around?
Yeah, that's the argument. It says you can't be elected more than twice. It doesn't say you can't be president after that. And when they were drafting it, they had language that said you can't be president after that, and they changed it. So it's not like this is an accident.
But that's the thing, Norm. You could say, look, elected versus serve, that is a rhetorical dance that they never intended us to take. But then when you look at the other point that Brian makes, perhaps there was intentional ambiguity. I guess that's the debate.
Aaron, I'm a little outnumbered by Larry Tribe and Professor Kalt, but I will tell you that I have the vast majority of constitutional scholars on my side. Thousands, literally. When you read the plain text, no person shall be elected to the office of the president more than twice. That's the 22nd Amendment. Then you look over at the 12th Amendment. No person constitutionally ineligible, in other words, elected more than twice, to the office of president shall be eligible to be vice president. So I think this is like medieval debates of the angels dancing on the head of a pin. I respect Professor Kalt, obviously Larry Tribe, my mentor and frequent co-author. Wrong, wrong, wrong. This is a gigantic distraction by Donald Trump to not talk about the other things that are bad for him. Never happening.
Professor Kalt, and I know, and I'm not asking a political question here, but it is the fact that rhetorically Trump talks about this again and again, that he says this weekend he's not joking, that he talks about there are methods. Whatever he may be trying to do, Norm, maybe you're right, but Professor, is it not possible that that is also giving permission to a whole swath of people around him or who might vote for him to believe in it?
Absolutely. That's the nature of constitutional interpretation. It doesn't matter, again, what a bunch of constitutional law experts think if there is an alternative interpretation, and people tend to latch on to whatever constitutional interpretation delivers the political result that they want. And that's the issue here.
So, Norm, Professor Tribe also said when we asked him, he told us to focus on this. He said that Trump's, quote, role as an oath-breaking insurrectionist could render him ineligible to run for any public office under Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. What do you think of that, Norm?
Well, Aaron, it's like you read my mind. People I respect push that argument to the Supreme Court, like this argument that the Constitution supposedly is ambiguous and allows a third term, it lost 9-0. If this goes to the Supreme Court, it'll have a similar purpose. You know what the law is that Donald Trump doesn't want to talk about? 46 courts, Democratic and Republican, across the country that have slammed his other illegal ideas that he's put in executive orders and otherwise. As you know, I've been involved in a lot of that litigation, won another court order against him on Friday. This is a gigantic distraction. Don't fall for it, folks.